Welcome to Washington Today for Monday, June 9th, 2025. I'm Gary Starkoff. Thank you for joining us. The Trump administration has ordered about 700 Marines into Los Angeles to support National Guard troops in the wake of protests this weekend over immigration. This comes after California Attorney General Rob Bonta said today he is suing the Trump administration over the deployment of those National Guard troops. He called the move unlawful, unnecessary, and an infringement on Governor Gavin Newsom's authority. Media reports say the situation in the city has calmed down since the weekend, and LA police have declared all of downtown an unlawful assembly area after arresting dozens over the weekend. We'll hear from Attorney General Bonta, Governor Newsom, and the president coming up. Senate Republican leaders are continuing to focus their energy on budget reconciliation while the divisions over Medicaid changes and debt and deficit reduction remain. Senate Majority Leader John Thune says he will convene small working groups to hash out key components of the bill. Of course, no Democrats are expected to support it, and Senate Republicans can only afford 3 defections. Meanwhile, House Republicans are starting their efforts this week to lock in as much as $9 billion in spending cuts sought by Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency. Those include cuts to foreign aid and public broadcasting. And we are less than a week away from a military parade marking the 250th birthday of the U.S. Army. Thousands of soldiers, along with hundreds of military vehicles and aircraft, will take to the streets and skies of D.C. this Saturday. Army officials say they are doing everything to mitigate damage the military vehicles could do to city streets. We'll hear more about that from the Army Corps of Engineers and from the Secret Service about security for the event coming up. More on the Marine deployment, this from Politico. The troops deployed in LA will not participate in law enforcement activities unless the president invokes the Insurrection Act, which would allow them to suppress violence. That's according to 2 defense officials granted anonymity to discuss internal operations in this Politico story. Now, Politico goes on to write it is not clear what role the Marines will play, but one of the defense officials said they will likely support the 2,000 National Guard troops sent to assist law enforcement. Now, to California Attorney General Rob Bonta. He talked to reporters today about his lawsuit. Here's what he had to say.
The first few hundred troops arrived on Sunday. The protests had mostly dissipated, and streets were mostly quiet and calm. Since Trump announced his plan to deploy troops, the situation on the ground has escalated quickly, with unrest growing overnight, causing highways to close and putting people in danger. This wasn't the case on Saturday or Sunday morning. This was not inevitable. We'll never know what might have been had the president left our state and local authorities to continue the important work they were already doing and were more than capable of doing. What we do know is that what we saw yesterday happened after the president's unnecessary, counterproductive, and, most importantly, unlawful order. An order that abused the federal government's authority and violated the 10th Amendment and federal law. An order that skipped over multiple rational, common sense, strategic steps that should have been deployed to quell unrest and prevent escalation. As a result, I, in partnership with Governor Gavin Newsom, are suing President Trump and asking the court to set aside the president's unlawful action federalizing the California National Guard.
Attorney General Bonta said the lawsuit will also accuse the president and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth of violating the 10th Amendment. He said law enforcement agencies in Los Angeles are completely prepared for protests and that he thinks their resources should be depleted before any call goes in to bring in the National Guard. He also answered a question about protesters in L.A. who might be there to cause violence.
Hi there, Attorney General. Was curious about, you've condemned some of the more violent acts that we're seeing at night in regards to these protests. Has there been any indication that these are coming from a specific organized group? Are these randomized? And regardless, what is your message to these people who, are kind of indulging some of this chaos?
Unfortunately, this is a scenario that we see when there are peaceful protests and everyday people speak up and speak out peacefully. against an injustice, against a wrong, against something that they don't agree with, which is a core fundamental right in the United States of America. What we see sometimes is outside folks not interested in the underlying substantive issues that are leading to the protests that are being called out and where change is being sought. They sometimes embed themselves or use the protest as cover for chaotic, harmful, destructive, and criminal actions. And that is wrong. And my message to them is do not participate in unlawful activity. Follow the law. If you don't follow the law, we will find you and we will come for you and we will hold you accountable, as those who have been arrested on the ground have already found out. And so it's unfortunate that this is happening, and I rely heavily on the local law enforcement who are on the ground, who are on the street, who are interacting with those who are engaged in unlawful conduct, and they've indicated that that the supermajority of people engaged in protests are peaceful and lawful, and that those who are engaged in unlawful conduct and harmful conduct and violent conduct appear to be members of outside groups not related to the underlying substantive issue that is being protested.
Attorney General Bonta also dismissed President Trump's suggestion that his border czar, Tom Homan, should arrest California Governor Gavin Newsom.
I don't see it. It's just more talk, more bluff, more bluster, more threats. It's what they do. It's what they say. Mr. Homan has said similar things. So has Mr. Trump. States have rights. States can do lawful things. The Trump administration has shown at least 23 times with respect to California the willingness to be a repeat offender and violate the Constitution, violate the law. It is the president and the Trump administration that is consistently and frequently, blatantly and brazenly violating the law, not Governor Newsom. So it's seems to be more a bluster and threat. And look, this is what the Trump administration does. They threaten law firms. They call judges, so-called judges, and call for impeachment and question their authority to reduce their credibility. They kick the press, the free press, out of White House briefings. With fear, they seek to gain compliance. And that's not happening in California. We're going to stand up for our rights. We're going to stand up for our freedoms. We're going to stand up for the rule of law. We're going to defend our democracy. We're going to defend the Constitution. Everything Governor Newsom has done and is doing is completely lawful in the best interest of California, supporting California, California's people, our future, our financial resources lawfully. And it is the president that needs to put a mirror up to himself and realize that the unlawful actor here is him and his administration, not Governor Newsom.
California Attorney General Rob Bonta. Now, yesterday on MSNBC, Governor Newsom was asked about those arrest comments.
Tom Homan, the border czar, said to me yesterday he did not rule out literally arresting you, nor Mayor Bass, if you interfere in his work. He said you hadn't yet.
He's a tough guy. Why doesn't he do that? He knows where to find me. But you know what? Let your hands off 4-year-old girls that are trying to get educated. Let your hands off these poor people that are just trying to live their lives, man. Trying to live their lives, paying their taxes, been here 10 years. The fear, the horror. The hell is this guy? Come after me, arrest me. Let's just get it over with. Tough guy. You know, I don't give a damn. But I care about my community. I care about this community. The hell are they doing? These guys need to grow up. They need to stop. And we need to push back. And I'm sorry to be so clear, but that kind of bloviating is exhausting. So, Tom, arrest me. Let's go.
He also said the National Guard's presence in L.A. was about more than immigration enforcement.
This is about authoritarian tendencies. This is about command and control. This is about power. This is about ego. My way or the highway. This is a consistent pattern of practice, of recklessness. This guy has abandoned the core principles of this great democracy. He's threatening to go after judges he disagrees with, cut off funding to institutions of higher learning. He's on a cultural binge. He's rewriting history, censoring historical facts. I mean, this is something completely different. And this is part of that ongoing play that is unfolding in front of our eyes. It is a serious moment under the guise of immigration, but it's much deeper than that.
California Governor Gavin Newsom. At the White House today, President Trump hosted a roundtable focused on business investment, and he was asked about his response to the protests in L.A. compared to his response to the George Floyd protests in the summer of 2020.
In 2020, when you were talking about unrest in American cities, you said, quote, "We have to go by the laws. We can't call in the National Guard unless we're requested by a governor." What changed now? Why is this situation different to not consult with Governor Newsom about this?
Well, the biggest change from that statement is we have an incompetent governor. So I talked about governors, but I didn't talk about he's an incompetent governor. Look at the job he's doing in California. He's destroying one of our great states. And if I didn't get involved, if we didn't bring the Guard in, and we would bring more in if we needed it, because we have to make sure there's going to be law and order. You had a disaster happening. And they now admit it was a disaster. I watched the chief yesterday, who's a good man, by the way, and he said, "Well, we're lucky we did this because they were overwhelmed. You saw what was happening. So we did the right thing. Everybody agrees to that. But you have a governor who let the city burn down, didn't want water to be sent down to him. And I sent billions of gallons of water. I wanted to do it in the first term. He wouldn't do it over. I don't know. They have environmental reasons, but there were no environmental reasons. I think it's just a political philosophy. But it's lucky for the people in Los Angeles and in California that we did what we did. We got it just in time. It's still simmering a little bit, but not very much. Yeah, please.
Have you gotten
What crime has Governor Newsom committed?
A crime has he committed?
Yeah, to warrant his arrest.
I think his primary crime is running for governor because he's done such a bad job. What he's done to that state is like what Biden did to this country. And that's pretty bad. It's the wrong philosophy. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants, many of them prisoners. They're taking up your health care. They're taking up your space in schools. They're taking up your hospital. And in many cases, they're criminals. And we have to do something about it, and we're doing something about it. I want to thank the incredible patriots of ICE and Tom Homan, who has been incredible, and Kristi Noem, likewise incredible. The job they're doing, and it's like an unforced error. There was no reason for this. 21 million people were allowed into our country, and many of those people were criminals, and it's a shame. It's a shame, but we're getting them out, and I will say, I think it's a 95-5 issue, just like so many other issues, 95-5. And the Democrats lost an election in a landslide because they're on the wrong side of the issues. I mean, it's not even conceivable that somebody would do the kind of things that he did. And then, you talk about projects. They want to build a train going from San Francisco to L.A., and it's costing hundreds of billions of dollars more than they thought it was going to cost. It's not even believable. To Brad and to people sitting here, would you believe that a train, it was going to cost X dollars and it might be 100 times X?
Would have paid for this for about 50 million American children.
You're right.
50 million American children instead of a 3-mile train track that never got built.
We could have put Lincoln in charge with no experience. He would have done a good job. I guarantee you that.
That at a White House event on business investment earlier this afternoon. And again, the Trump administration has ordered about 700 Marines into Los Angeles to support National Guard troops in the wake of protests this weekend over immigration. It is not clear, according to media reports, what the Marines' role will be. They will not participate in law enforcement activities unless the president invokes the Insurrection Act. And media reports quoting that the Marines will likely support the 2,000 National Guard troops who are there to assist law enforcement. Now, this afternoon, House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries was asked about the situation in L.A.
Do you think that some of the images we're seeing from Los Angeles put Democrats who are in swing districts in a tough spot when they might be asked to defend some of these things, when immigration and fighting back against ICE is not a front and center issue in those districts?
No one is actually defending
any unlawful behavior. I am defending the right for the American people to peacefully assemble. And will continue to encourage people to exercise that right peacefully. And if anyone crosses the line, they should be held accountable by the relevant authorities. We will not be lectured by Donald Trump and anyone in the Republican Party about issues of law and order. Not a single one of them. Donald Trump promised to lower costs on day one. Costs haven't gone down, they're going up. Inflation is going up. Donald Trump lied to the American people. You know what he did do on day one? He pardoned hundreds of violent felons, criminals, who brutally assaulted police officers and attacked the Capitol on January 6th. That's what Donald Trump did on day one. The hostages weren't released on day one like he promised. He lied. The war didn't end in Ukraine on day one. Donald Trump lied. Costs didn't go down in America on day one of Donald Trump's presidency. He lied to you, the American people. You know what he did on day one? He pardoned hundreds of violent felons who brutally beat police officers. That's the insurrection. And so the notion that Donald Trump and his minions, his sycophants here in the House of Representatives or in the Senate, who are nothing more than a reckless rubber stamp for Donald Trump's extreme agenda, are going to lecture America about issues of law and order, get lost. We're not feeling you at all. You have zero credibility.
House Democratic Leader Hakeem Jeffries. Now to the Republicans' budget reconciliation bill from the Hill. The biggest obstacle the bill faces is that many Republican senators are demanding more deficit reduction. Those include Susan Collins of Maine, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Josh Hawley of Missouri, and Jerry Moran of Kansas, who are objecting to the biggest deficit reduction in the bill currently. Hundreds of billions of dollars in Medicaid spending cuts. This has Republican senators looking for new strategies to further reduce the deficit without cutting more deeply into Medicaid, or SNAP, that's the federal government's food assistance program. The latest proposal has interest from several members of the Senate Finance Committee, including Louisiana Republican Bill Cassidy, Kansas Republican Roger Marshall, and North Carolina Republican Tom Tillis. Theirs is a proposal to root out, quote, waste, fraud, and abuse in the Medicare Advantage program. That from the Hill on the latest on the Senate Republicans' budget bill. Now, Senate Republican Leader John Thune talked about the bill on the floor today.
We're rapidly approaching floor consideration of our reconciliation bill, and Democrats are melting down. I'm pretty sure the Democrat leader was on the floor every day last week, bemoaning the bill and emphasizing how Democrats are going to fight with everything they've got. That's right, Mr. President, with everything they've got. Democrats are going to use every resource at their disposal to fight against extending tax relief for American families. They're going to fight against funding to secure our border. They're going to fight against funding to equip our military. They're going to fight against unleashing American energy. And they're going to fight against all our efforts to make America safer, stronger, and more prosperous. And I guess it's not that surprising, Mr. President. After all, Democrats' previous pledges not to raise taxes on anyone making less than $400,000 a year often felt a little bit grudging. When you're constantly looking to expand government, I guess it makes sense that you'd be more interested in raising taxes than in allowing Americans to keep more of their hard-earned money. And if the Biden border crisis taught us anything, it's that Democrats have essentially no interest in securing our borders at all. And speaking of President Biden, after years of Biden budgets that de-emphasize investing in our military, I guess it's no surprise that filling the gaps in our readiness is not a Democrat priority. Democrat hostility to conventional energy is also well known. And so, again, I guess it's no surprise that Democrats are opposed to unleashing America's energy resources. But it's worth thinking about, in essence, Mr. President, what Democrats are endorsing by fighting against this reconciliation bill. They're endorsing a $2.6 trillion tax hike on Americans making less than $400,000 a year. $2.6 trillion.
Senate Republican Leader John Thune, part of his Leader Time remarks. Senate Democratic Whip Dick Durbin talked on the floor about changes to Medicaid.
If you've ever lived at a moment in your life with a sick child, seriously sick child, and no health insurance, you'll never forget it. I know, I've been there. To think that 16 million families would lose their health insurance is impossible to imagine. And we received a report from the Congressional Budget Office just last week. Now, they're neutral. They're not Democrats, they're not Republicans. They revealed that the Republican proposal would cost 16 million families their health insurance coverage, the biggest cut to health care in American history. No wonder, then, that the Republicans want to move this bill quickly. They don't want to talk about the impact it's going to have on the Medicaid program. Medicaid, of course, is a program that provides health insurance based on a person's income. Lower income individuals qualify for it. Those in higher incomes don't. The facts are coming out now that many of the Republicans in the House are saying, well, we didn't read the bill when it went through there. They've got a chance to read it now, and Republican and Democratic senators have a chance to read it here. To make sure that the Senate Republicans don't make the same mistake as the House, here's a more detailed breakdown. With this analysis from the Congressional Budget Office, we have new estimates on how this bill impacts each and every state. 210,000 people in my neighboring state of Missouri, Senator Hawley's state, could lose their health insurance coverage. 210,000. In Iowa, nearly 100,000 people could lose their health plans. And for our neighbor in Indiana, 250,000 Hoosiers could lose the peace of mind that comes with having health insurance. Same story coast to coast. 40,000 people in Maine, 26,000 Alaskans, they're all going to be victimized. And you say to yourself, what is it that is so compelling that the Republicans feel they can stand up and tell 16 million people in America you lose your health insurance? What will they use that money for? What will they take it to the bank for? For something very basic. Tax cuts for the wealthiest people in America. Oh, there they go again. Democrats talking about tax cuts. Many of the Republicans deny that this is going to happen, but the facts are there. They estimate that the top 0.1% of wage earners in America, under the Republican plan that passed the House, will get an annual tax break of $400,000. Now, the Republicans quickly have, well, go ahead and tell the rest of the story. Everybody gets a tax break, okay? Let's go down to the other end of the spectrum. $400,000 for 0.1% of wage earners. What about those who are making minimum wage? What will they get as a tax break? $20 a month. $20 a month. While the cost of health care goes up and the cost of their mortgage goes up, $20 a month.
Senate Democratic Whip Dick Durbin on the floor. Now, any changes the Senate makes to the bill means it has to go back to the House. Speaker Mike Johnson spoke to reporters about that at the White House this afternoon.
Johnson, what is your ask for Thune and the rest of Senate Republicans? I mean, can the House live with a cap lower than $40,000?
You mean on salt? Well, I've asked them to modify it as little as possible because I've got a very delicate balance there, and it took us a better part of a year to negotiate that fix. And I understand that Republicans in the Senate are not in love with the idea of raising the salt cap, and nor am I. I also come from a red state, but the reality is that we have a very diverse conference, and we have House Republicans from all over the country, and some of them come from these blue states. And this is a very important thing for their constituents, and we've got to give them something to take home and deliver. So that was a hard-fought a consensus that we found, and as is general with the bill overall, I just asked them to modify it as little as possible so we can get it done and get it to the president's desk.
Speaker Johnson talking about so-called SALT. That is the state and local tax deduction. That is a federal tax deduction, and he was speaking at the White House earlier today. Now, the Hill's Emily Brooks talked about what its prospects looked like in the House should it go back there.
Well, we're still looking to see what exactly the Senate is going to change in this one big, beautiful bill. But, there are people who are fiscal hawks who are warning that if the Senate cuts back on some of the spending reductions or deficit reductions or things like rolling back green energy tax credits, that they will not vote for the bill. This is something that the House Freedom Caucus said in a statement that they put out last week. So on the one end, you have that. And then on the other hand, you have more moderate Republicans in districts that are really benefiting from those green energy tax credits that were originally passed under President Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, who are hoping that the Senate slows down the rollback of those tax credits or even leaves some of them alone. So that's certainly going to be a point of division. And then there's the whole question about the state and local tax deduction, which is one of the biggest sticking points for some of those blue state Republicans, really warning to not roll back any part of that. On the other hand, Senate Republicans are not exactly crazy about increasing the state and local tax deduction.
And as we mentioned, House Republicans are starting efforts this week to lock in as much as $9 billion in spending cuts sought by Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency. Those include cuts to foreign aid and public broadcasting. Here's Emily Brooks with more on that.
So this is going to be one of the big legislative efforts, actually not that big compared to the big, beautiful bill, but this would roll back and claw back $9.4 million, $1 billion in previously appropriated funds to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which funds public radio and PBS, and also claws back funding that was appropriated to a lot of foreign aid programs, particularly in USAID. So this is essentially codifying those DOGE cuts that Republicans, many of them have been calling for, is codification of that, because this funding has already been approved and appropriated through the end of the fiscal year on September 30th for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Some of it has been approved for future years. And so this would essentially claw that back. And this is something that people like Speaker Mike Johnson are pointing to say, hey, if you're upset about the one big, beautiful bill not doing enough to cut spending, this rescissions package that the White House sent is going to be one of the ways to do that. And importantly, this is also going through another special process to where once the White House tells Congress what it wants to claw back, it can be approved with just a simple majority vote in both chambers of Congress. That means Republicans can do it without any help from Democrats. And so it will be a pretty big test for those Republicans who might be a little bit nervous about clawing back some of that foreign aid money in particular to see if they will approve those DOGE cuts.
The Hill's Emily Brooks on this morning's Washington Journal. You can see all of our week ahead in Congress at cspan.org and on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. You're listening to Washington Today.
Kenneth Rogoff is professor of economics at Harvard University and former International Monetary Fund chief economist. In his most recent book, Our Dollar, Your Problem, he argues that America's currency might have reached today's lofty pinnacle without a certain amount of good luck. However, as Professor Rogoff nears the end of his 345-page book, he writes, quote, if rapidly rising debt is left unchecked, and there seems to be little political appetite to rein in massive deficits, the United States and the entire world is in for a substantial period of global financial volatility marked by higher average real interest rates and inflation, unquote.
Harvard University professor of economics and former International Monetary Fund chief economist Kenneth Rogoff with his most recent book, Our Dollar, Your Problem, on this episode of Book Notes Plus with our host, Brian Lamb. Book Notes Plus is available wherever you get your podcasts and on the C-SPAN Now app.
Welcome back to Washington Today from 9 News in Denver, reporting that the Boulder, Colorado Police Department had several precautionary safety measures in place this weekend, like increased patrols, drones, defense barriers, and snipers, as more than 15,000 people came out for the city's Jewish festival on the city's Pearl Street Mall. That's the same place where 15 people were injured a week ago in a firebomb attack. Colorado Public Radio, reporting on the event, writes the festival centered around Run for Their Lives. That's the group that was targeted in the attack, and they are calling for the release of the hostages held by Hamas. CPR quoted Rabbi Hillel Goldberg saying, quote, "The Jewish people show up. Something happens, we show up. We don't hide. We're not afraid. We confront it. The days that the Jewish people quivered and hid are over." One of the speakers at this event, Moshe Levy. He is the brother-in-law of Omri Moran, who was one of the 251 hostages kidnapped in Hamas attacks on October 7th, 2023. He said, quote, "This is not a political campaign. It's not about left or right. It's about straight, what is right, and not what is wrong. In our tradition, the Jewish tradition, the redemption of our captives is a sacred obligation. What you are doing is sacred, truly giving hope to families like mine who are showing that our hostages are not forgotten, that our families are loved and embraced." The suspect in last week's attack in Boulder faces more than 100 criminal charges, including multiple counts of attempted murder. From KTLA.com, David Huerta, president of the California branch of the Service Employees International Union, makes his first appearance in an LA courtroom today. In a criminal complaint, the Department of Homeland Security alleges that he and other protesters attempted to halt the service of a search warrant at a downtown LA business on Friday by forming picket lines on public sidewalks to prevent officers from entering. Of course, all this is playing out as protests in LA continue against ICE raids. And here in Washington, D.C. today, a group of supporters gathered in front of the Justice Department in support of David Huerta. One of the speakers, Washington State Democrat Pramila Jayapal.
Now, I want to say something to you. It is actually in the interest of all American people to stand up for these rights. They know that dividing us is what will make them strong. And they know that when we are united, nobody can divide us. They want to distract you from their power grab for authoritarian power on the backs of working people. They want to distract you from the fact that they are trying to strip people of health care and make Americans poorer and sicker, all so they can give a $5 trillion tax break to the wealthiest billionaires. We say not on our watch. And all of the violence and the escalation is core to the Trump administration's authoritarian playbook. As we see people exercising their constitutional rights to peacefully use their voices to speak out against this injustice, they are being met with tear gas and rubber bullets from this unconstitutional, unlawful administration. And look, even the LA Police Department said that the protests were peaceful before Trump rolled in with military tanks on the streets of Los Angeles. Federal law enforcement from DHS, ICE, HSI, and the FBI, all to crack down on peaceful protesters who were standing up for immigrant workers, who were standing up for the economy of this country, who were standing up for our communities, for our families, and saying, don't tear us apart. We are going to stand united against this authoritarian power grab.
Washington State Democrat and Congressional Progressive Caucus Chair Pramila Jayapal. The Guardian reporting today that David Huerta was hospitalized and released for injuries he sustained during the arrest last week. Videos circulating online show officers shoving him to the ground during the arrest before handcuffing him. The SEIU national office posted on X today, quote, "From Massachusetts to California, we call for David Huerta's immediate release and for an end to ICE raids that are tearing our communities apart." Several other labor unions are calling for David Huerta's release, including the AFL-CIO, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, and the National Education Association, whose leader, Randy Weingarten, also spoke at the event.
This is not a battle that's going to be won or lost by this rally today. There is something, this is Pride Month. We used to have Pride Day, it's now Pride Month. Wait. That started just like in the civil rights movement, in the Jim Crow era, when people had to keep fighting and fighting and fighting. In the AIDS era, people had to keep fighting and fighting and fighting. So the last thing I will say is this: silence equals death. That's right. We must not only be in solidarity today, but each and every day together, because silence equals death. That's right. That is what Mr. Trump wants. He wants to silence us. He wants to create fear. He wants to create apathy. So I am asking you, are we going to be silent?
No!
Are we going to work to get David freed?
Yeah!
Are we going to work every day for the promise of America?
Yeah!
For the promise for immigrants?
Yeah!
For the promise for school children?
Yes!
For the promise for freedom?
Yes!
For the promise for justice?
Yes!
Because, what's the saying from the beginning of the speech?
People united will never be defeated. The people united will never be defeated. The people united will never be defeated.
National Education Association President Randy Weingarten speaking out in front of the Department of Justice here in Washington today. If convicted, David Huerta faces up to 6 years in federal prison. You can see all of today's event at cspan.org and the C-SPAN Now mobile app. From Fox5DC.com, major preparations are underway for the U.S. Army's 250th birthday parade this Saturday here in D.C. Matt McCool, U.S. Secret Service, from the U.S. Secret Service Washington Field Office, he's the special agent in charge, says they're expecting hundreds of thousands attendees to this Saturday's event.
Looking to the upcoming festival and parade, we're preparing for an enormous turnout. Hundreds of thousands of attendees. It is our duty to ensure the safety and security of every participant. We are deploying thousands of agents, officers, and specialists from across the country, backed by the robust network of federal, state, and local partners. Our mission is not just to secure an event, but to ensure public confidence and safety. The Secret Service and our partners want every attendee to be confident in their security and feel safe. That is why we are leaving no stone unturned. Everyone entering the event will go through screening at clearly designated checkpoints. These checkpoints and the entire security perimeter will be mapped out and available at www.nsse.dc.gov, along with important updates on road closures, parking restrictions, prohibited items, and other logistical changes.
And as we said, there's been much concern about possible damage from tanks and other military vehicles on D.C. streets. Well, here's Colonel Jesse Curry, director of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Office of the Chief Engineer.
So if you go out to the parade route even today, you can see some of that work being put into place. And what that is it started weeks ago with assessments, working with National Park Service, Federal Highway Administration, and really bringing to bear the engineers from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, our expert engineers that around the world assess the impacts of these types of vehicles on all types of pavement. So they've done that assessment. Based on that, we put together the plan that you'll see being put at key locations around the route. Primarily, it is metal plating that's being put down to address those areas where tanks have to steer sharply, and we get some of it a grinding reaction from between those tracks. Throughout the straightaways, we really have very little or low concerns that there will be any other damage. The plates and where we're putting them is designed to minimize or eliminate all possible damage. So that's ongoing now. Will be in place before the parade begins, and will come up immediately after.
Is there anything beyond the plates, or is that sort of is there anything beyond the plates, or is that kind of the bulk of it?
Well, thanks for asking, because there is. That is certainly the most visible thing that everyone's going to be able to see out along the parade route. But in addition to that, we're putting down a lot of matting in the staging areas, things, again, to just mitigate any potential. We're using an abundance of caution. We want to protect these streets. This is our capital city as well, so we're committed to ensuring that we minimize any possible damage. But in addition to the protective measures being put on the road, what you can also see during the parade is the tanks all have brand new rubber track pads placed on them, which increase the padding that they have underneath each track to minimize that potential damage. And it's a parade, so they're going to be moving slowly. They're going to be very careful. The operators that are coming with the units to this parade, they're very, very well trained at what they do. And give us complete confidence that we're going to be able to execute this parade with little to no damage to the D.C. streets.
Colonel Jesse Curry, director of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Office of the Chief Engineer. Fox 5 DC reporting that crews are laying out nearly 19 miles of barricades around the parade and festival area. There will be 175 magnetometers for public screening, thousands of Secret Service and FBI agents brought in from around the country, drones overhead for aerial surveillance, plus both D.C. police and U.S. Park Police will be fully activated. And we'll have coverage of Saturday's event here on the C-SPAN networks, and you can see all of today's security briefing at cspan.org and C-SPAN Now, our free mobile video app. That's also where you can find this program as a podcast. You can also find it on YouTube. Just search Washington Today. And for more on the stories that are shaping Washington every day, get our daily email, word for word. Just go to cspan.org/connect to subscribe. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thanks a lot for listening today to Washington Today.